We're in the series, Be a Nobody. And listen, I'm just going to tell you right now, if you've been here the last 3 weeks, I'm going to repeat a whole bunch of stuff. And then if you haven't, it's new. But don't act like it's new because maybe your neighbor, it's repeated and you don't want them to judge you, right? That was a joke. They won't judge you. But anyway. All right, so the series is Be a Nobody. It's a weird name, but the whole idea is that the greatest thing that I can do in life is disappear and let Jesus shine through, right? John the Baptist said this. He said, he must become greater, I must become less. John the Baptist at the time was the greatest prophet in Israel. His followers were like, what do we do with this Jesus guy? And John's like, well, actually what you do with this Jesus guy is you scream his name and don't say mine anymore. And that's the goal. That's the goal. That's what it means to follow Jesus. That's what you're shooting for. Like ultimately, man, the gospel is not about making me famous. It's not about making me happy, healthy, and wealthy. It's not about making my life better. The gospel is about taking my cross up, putting it on my shoulder just like my Savior did, and hoping that all people ever see is the cross on my back as I try to carry it uphill in his name. That is the Christian walk. And so the Be a Nobody. And what we've been talking about for the past 2 weeks, and this is the last week of like a 3-part sermon really, is that we have to be good listeners. If we're gonna be nobodies, we have to be good listeners because God's got stuff to say, surprise. Like we don't serve a God who's silent. That doesn't mean necessarily that he's gonna boom through your car speakers. As a matter of fact, oftentimes God's voice is heard in a gentle whisper. It's heard in times when we don't expect it. It's heard when we're able to make the chaos go away. But he speaks. And the problem is we don't listen, right? Has anybody ever had this experience with their kids? You say something and they keep doing whatever it is you tell them to stop doing. Then you say it again. And the first time you're like, maybe they didn't hear me. So the next time you're a little bit louder. And then the third time you're a little bit louder, meaning you're screaming at this point. And then they still don't listen. And the fourth time you start with this phrase, I'm not gonna say it again, right? Why? Well, because kids don't listen. It's not that, look, okay, I'm not gonna speak for your kids. Let me speak for my kids. Right? My oldest especially, Nora, dude, she wants to do the right thing every time. She's such a goody two-shoes. She tells me when I'm doing bad stuff. Daddy, don't say that. That's mean. It's like, it's not mean. You leave me alone, you know? She wants to do the right thing, but she's in this phase of life where like I have to say things 3 or 4 times to get her to hear me. Now, maybe if it was one of my other girls, I would think that she was straight up not listening, like ignoring me, but she's not. She's not. When this little girl was 18 months old, she'd start whining and then fall into the floor, you know, the melting tantrum. And I would look at her and I'd say, get up. We don't act like that. 18 months old, she wants to listen. But sometimes she doesn't. That's our problem. Like, that's our problem. If you love Jesus and you want to follow Jesus, man, you want to listen. But, you know, other stuff is more exciting. Other stuff is louder. And listening is a practice. Something you have to learn. Something you have to figure out. If you're married, you know what I'm talking about. And I'm not just talking to the guys. I know sometimes we get sexist like that, you know. Ladies too, right? Because why? Well, probably your spouse talks about things that you don't care about at all. And you have to learn how to care about those things. And it's you know, it's work. If my wife wants to listen to me talk, sometimes she's gonna have to listen about NASCAR and she don't care. That's rednecks driving in circles. What's wrong with her? What's wrong with me? That's probably what's going through her mind, right? It's a practice. So we've been talking about Elijah, and it's this moment on Mount Sinai that we've been going through. So basically the way that this sets up is Elijah has this big moment. This is in 1 Kings 18. And he has this big moment where he basically duels it out with the prophets of Baal, which is a false god. And he duels it out with the prophets of Baal. And the prophets of Baal work for King Ahab. King Ahab is a wicked king. His wife Jezebel is wicked as well. And so he duels it out with these prophets. He ends up killing the prophets. God shows himself in a miraculous way. And it seems as though Elijah believes that this huge moment is supposed to be this great victory because it happens. God actually sends rain. It hadn't rained for a couple years. And then he there's this miracle. God lets him run really fast. So he's like the Flash for a second. I just like to believe that Elijah's like me and he's always been slow his whole life. And then all of a sudden he can run like Usain Bolt. You know what I'm saying? Because if I could do that, I would find it amazing, the wind whipping through my hair. That only happens when the wind blows, not when I run. So, like he's doing that. He outruns the chariot. He gets back to town before King Ahab because King Ahab ran away. And then he gets this threat at the beginning of chapter 19. Jezebel says to him, well, through a messenger, says, "May the gods strike me and even kill me if by this time tomorrow I have not killed you, just as you killed them." So she swears on the name of the God that he just defeated that she's gonna kill him. This should be for Elijah this moment where he's like, yeah, haha, no way, not gonna happen. But actually what happens is he freaks out and he runs into the desert. And he runs into the desert and he lays down under a tree and he says, "God, just kill me now. I'm done. I got nothing left." And that's what we covered in the first week. And it was like when you poured yourself out, let God sustain you. You have to listen long enough to let him feed you, feed your soul, take care of you. Like there are some ways, honestly, that God's going to sustain you physically. Maybe God's going to send you a blessing that you don't know about, but like you got to shut up long enough to figure out that it's coming or to figure out that it's him in the first place. Like listening is important in this way because he will send sustenance, but he gives instruction with it, or he tells you what's going on. Like with Elijah, he says, "Get up and eat, or the journey will be too much for you." Right? And Elijah's like, "No, just kill me." So he has this huge victory, this mountaintop moment, and then all of a sudden he's just like, "I'm done. That's it." Why? Well, it must have been for Elijah that he thought that this big moment at Mount Carmel where he defeats the prophets of Baal and makes Ahab look stupid and makes Jezebel look stupid, that this moment is going to be the moment that God moves and the kingdom's taken back and they praise Yahweh again forever, and Baal and Asherah, they go away and things are set right, Like we have those moments in our lives. We have those moments in our lives where we think this victory, this next step is going to be everything, right? And almost every time it doesn't work out that way. When you're a kid, you're like, man, when I get married, life will just be so much better. And then you get married and you realize it's good, but you doubled your problems because now there's two of you, right? And then you're like, you're arguing a little bit or whatever. And you're like, man, if we can just have kids. And now you realize problems are getting exponential in growth. I'm not saying that blessings don't come with it. They do, right? But the problems grow too. You just think that the next thing's gonna make it better. Oh, if we could just get that house. Then you live in that house for 6 months. You realize there's mold in it. Or you buy a new house, but you have a dog. And you realize dogs destroy everything. That's my dog. We had a new house for about a week. And then it was used. And then it's like, if I get that car, then you got to put tires on it. I don't know if y'all know this, but tires are very expensive now. Like, it cost me $1,200 to put tires on a minivan. It should float. Now I hate that minivan. Well, I hated it when I bought it, honestly, but it's a minivan. But anyway, we think that these victories, that these moves, they'll solve everything, and they don't. And Elijah finds himself in that place, and when it doesn't work, he's completely defeated. And we fall into that trap, and what really happens is what we need to hear from God, but really all we're hearing is our own disappointment, right? All we're hearing is the inner voice being like, you're a failure, this isn't working, this is your fault. Then move forward, and God feeds him for the journey. The journey is to Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is this amazing place in the Bible. So it's mentioned in the Bible as Mount Sinai, Mount Horeb. It's the same place. Moses gets the 10 Commandments there. There's a handful of other things that happen with Moses there. And Elijah goes there, and he goes to this place called the cave. Potentially, this is the cave that Moses got the 10 Commandments. Like, he literally met with God, got the 10 Commandments, came down from the mountain. His face is still shining from the glory of God. Like this could be that place. And so Elijah goes there, and he gets there, and God says, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And Elijah says, "I have zealously served the Lord God Almighty, but the people of Israel have broken their covenant with you, torn down your altars, and killed every one of your prophets. I'm the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too. What are you doing here, Elijah?" Basically, the response is this: I don't know. I came to the place where you are, because in this idea, it's the place where heaven meets earth. I came to the place where you are because I'm all alone and they're trying to kill me. Maybe I'm just here because it's the only place I'm not going to get got. And God goes, "Okay, walk out to the edge of the cave. Let's talk." Simultaneously, one of the most amazing and terrifying moments in the Bible, right? "Go out and stand before me on the mountain." And as Elijah stood there, the Lord passed by, and a mighty windstorm hit the mountain. It was such a terrible blast that the rocks were torn loose, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord wasn't in the earthquake. After the earthquake, there was a fire, but the Lord wasn't in the fire. After the fire, there was the sound of a gentle whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. So what we talked about last week is that once I've laid it all out, when I've been honest with God, right? When I've let go, when I've let loose the things that I think I need to say, I need to let him minister to me. It's not that God needs to hear what's on your heart. God knows what's on your heart. It's that you need to get it out of your heart so that you can let him speak. You have to make room, right? And so he goes out and he hears the gentle whisper, and he wraps his face in his cloak. And then God says, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And we can assume that there's a change in tone here, because the wrapping his face in his cloak is it's a sign of respect. It's a sign of submission. It's the same as when other people meet with an angel or meet with God and they react with fear. "Don't kill me." It's this, "I'm not worthy to be in your presence." And he says the exact same thing he said before. "I've zealously served the Lord God Almighty, but the people of Israel have broken their covenant with you, torn down their altars, and killed every one of your prophets. I'm the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too. What are you doing here, Elijah?" "Well, I came here because I have nowhere else to go." The scenario that we're going to unfold this week is the first one, when you've poured yourself out, let him sustain you. When you've laid it all out was the second one, let him minister to you. The third scenario here is when you've given it all up, let him lead you. When you've given it all up, right? Like it's the idea of surrender. But I didn't use the word surrender. I think I talked about this in the last few months, but I didn't use the word surrender because I find that to be such a confounding concept in the Christian faith, because, well, I wrote it down. The thing about giving it up is that you don't give it up when you say you give it up. You give it up when you actually give it up, but you can't give it up unless you say you give it up. So say you're going to give it up till you actually give it up. Try it again. I'll change the words. The thing about surrender is that you don't surrender when you say you're going to surrender. You surrender when you actually surrender. But you can't surrender unless you say you're going to surrender. So you have to keep saying you're going to surrender till you surrender. At the end of the day, what this comes down to is like, man, There's something that's in the way that you're not letting God lead. It may be in general, you're not letting God lead in your life. It may be more specific. It may be an area of your life you're not letting him lead, but there's something that you got to give up on. There's something you got to give up on. And that's where Elijah's at. I mean, I'm putting thoughts in his head or words in his mouth, but like the way I read this, he thought he was the hero. He thought he was going to be the hero. Like obviously his heart, it doesn't seem that his heart got prideful, so he knew that it was God working through him, but he thought he was going to get to be a part of the heroic action. He thought that this showdown at Mount Carmel was going to change everything. He thought that this was going to be it, and then it wasn't it, and then that's so defeating because it didn't work. And so it didn't work, so like what's left? Like what's left? How's this gonna fix itself? How's this gonna change? Like God, just kill me because I don't want to see what's gonna happen to my people, to your people, if things don't get fixed. I don't want to be here for that, right? And like Elijah has to meet with God and realize he's got to let that go. He covers his face in his cloak. He realizes that God is God. God is God over all. God is sovereign. It's his plan. Why are you here? Because I've done everything else I know to do. And I'm all alone and they want to kill me. So I figured this was a good place to be as any. There's wisdom in that. Like there's times in our lives where like, man, sometimes you just, I think, at least in American Christianity, we haven't done the best job of making sacred spaces, right? It's not that God lives in the space. It's that the space takes us to a place. It's a service for us, not for him. That's one of the things that churches get upside down. They'll build these big, beautiful buildings, and they don't let anybody do anything that could possibly be destructive in the sanctuary because it's like, this is God's space. Well, no, this is the space where you meet with God. And so what God does for you here is something you can remember, so it's easier for you to meet here, but God's not going to be mad that there's coffee stains on the floor, so maybe you should just chill out, right? But basically, in American Christianity, the only sacred space that we all have, that we all talk about, is the church. It's at church. Man, you have to do the work of creating sacred spaces in your life too. Because Elijah has a place he knows he needs to go to meet with God. Right? And the place means something for him. God created the whole world. God created that mountain. God created other mountains. Right? But because there was history there, because there's a great story there, because there's just this sense of legacy, of lineage there, it's the place Elijah knew to go, right? We have to give it up. There's something that you need to create a sacred space for, get in there and just lay it before God. And by the way, when I say that, like maybe it's your closet, you know what I mean? They just move the stinky shoes to the other side of the closet and get on your face and pray. There's something though. We all have something that's in the way. You just got to let it go. Give it up. The problem is it's frustrating. Like it's terrible. Because you say, it's like the old stories of like quitting smoking, right? The joke is that actually the last cigarette? Because people who quit smoking have like hundreds of last cigarettes, right? And so then it becomes a joke. It's like, oh, that's the last one. Okay, But like, it's kind of like that when we have to give something back to God, when we have to give things up. It's like, I'm going to do it. And you don't. I'm going to do it. and then you don't. There have been times in my life where like, I know I have to let something go. I know it's in the way it's in between me and God. I know it's a problem, and I'll pray and I'll be like, God, please. And then I'll pray and I'll be like, God, please. And I'll pray and I'll be, please. And then finally I get to a place where I'm just sick of hearing me say the same thing over and over again. So I stop praying. And then nothing gets fixed. Right? But then the tendency there is to get to that place and then be like mad at God because God didn't do it. But like the actual problem is you stopped. There's this, I actually didn't plan on this, but we're going to go with it. So there's this Romans 12:2, right? So Romans 12:2 is, to me, to my mind, one of the most amazing verses in the Bible. I was just having a conversation about it with a guy after last service. So Romans 12:2 says this: don't copy the behavior and the customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good, pleasing, and perfect, right? The NIV, for some of y'all who are like old school, says it this way: do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will, right? So here's the thing about giving things up. Here's the thing about giving something back to God. The problem is your brain. So what happens is you create these neural pathways. Normal people call them habits, right? And basically your brain is designed in such a way that if you do something over and over and over and over again, you don't have to consciously think about it, right? And you kind of just automatically start doing it. It's why, like, if somebody moves something in your house, you'll go to that same place for the next 2 weeks. Because your brain just takes you there. It's it's an amazing thing, because without that, you'd have to think through every single little thing. And if you had to think through every single little thing, you wouldn't get anything done because you'd have to think about things all the time. But our brains get programmed, right? And the thing that's amazing about this verse is there's no way Paul would have understood the science behind this, but it actually happens. And he says that don't conform any longer to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. When you stop doing what the world says to do and start doing what God says to do, your mind is renewed because you start creating new neural pathways. Your mind actually changes. Right? And the thing about not being able to give something up or not being able to surrender to God, it's not that God's not doing it. It's that you're trying to cut a road out of a jungle. It's a brand new path. It takes time. God didn't not listen to you. You got lazy. It takes time. That's the thing. You don't surrender something just when you say you're going to do it. You do it when you actually do it, and you don't have control over when you're actually going to do it. Sometimes you do, though. And sometimes, instead of being lazy, you just don't give it up because you don't want to give it up. Life is complicated. It's not always black and white. Either way, once you've given it all up, you then have to let him lead you. What follows surrender is a move of God, right? And so often what happens is bloodshed happens, and that's what causes surrender. Pain happens, and that's what causes surrender. But on the other side of it is a move of God, and that's when you have to listen. When you've come to a moment of complete breakdown, of complete sacrifice, of complete surrender, of like, God, I thought I had this all right, but I guess you want something else. When you get to that moment, the key thing that you have to do is shut up, because he's about to lay it out for you. So you have to let him lead you. Verse 15, the Lord came to him, or then the Lord told him, go back the same way you came and travel to the wilderness of Damascus. When you arrive there, anoint Hazael, king of Aram. Then anoint Jehu, grandson of Nimshi, to be king of Israel. And anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat, from the town of Abel-Meholah, to replace you as my prophet. Anyone who escapes from Hazael will be killed by Jehu, and those who escape Jehu will be killed by Elisha. Yet I will preserve 7,000 others in Israel who have never bowed to Baal or kissed him. So this is one of those moments in the Bible where God says something entirely profound, but you miss it because it's a bunch of names that are hard to pronounce, right? So God, the whole thing in this whole interaction is Ahab needs to stop being king. He's evil. He's leading the people to hell. He needs to stop being king. He's worshiping false gods. He's worshiping demons. He's worshiping things that are destroying the people. He has to be removed. That is Elisha. That was the hope at Mount Carmel. That's the thing that's got him frustrated. It's like, I'm doing everything you want me to do, and that guy's still going to kill me. This is a mess. And God speaks to Elijah, and then he says this. He says, go anoint Hazael king over Aram. Go anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, king over Israel. And then go get Elisha, son of Shaphat, to be your successor. And it's like, okay, what does that mean? Well, Hazael is king of the Arameans. They end up in war with Israel, and the Arameans kill Ahab. Jehu is anointed king. He's a leader in the Israelite army. He ends up taking the throne and eliminates the rest of Ahab's family. So his family line is removed from the kingship, which then means that Ahab's family is no longer able to oppress the people and to lead them down the wrong path. Then Elisha is anointed to be the next prophet over Israel, and Elisha follows Elijah around for the next few years until Elijah is taken away. What Elijah would have missed if God had granted his prayer in the desert is he would have missed the greatest move of God that he got to experience in his life. He would have missed the most fruitful ministry that God had in store for him. If God had just listened to Elijah's story would have ended there. But instead what he does is he goes and he empowers the people who will fix things. They don't fix things forever. They fix things for a time, but they fix things. And then he gets to lead Elisha along the way and teach him how to do the job. And Elisha actually becomes, well, the story goes that Elijah is about to be taken into heaven, and he kind of knows what God's doing. And by the way, Elijah doesn't die. That's the funniest thing. He literally prays, kill me, and God refuses forever. God's funny. I don't know if you know that. So Elijah gets taken off into heaven in a chariot of fire, and Elisha is following him, and Elijah's like, hey, stay here. Hey, stay here. And Elisha's like, nah, bro, I'm not leaving. I'm going where you're going. And finally, Elijah gets a little frustrated. He turns around and he goes, what do you want? Like, you keep doing this. What do you want? And he goes, I want a double portion of your blessing. It's like, I hope to be that bold, right? I want a double portion of your blessing. And Elijah goes, oh, that's going to be tough. He doesn't say that's going to be tough because it's hard for him to give it. He says it's going to be tough because he's like, bro, you don't know what you're asking for. You don't know the price I've paid. You don't know the burdens that come with that blessing. But he gives it to him, and Elisha goes on to perform twice as many miracles as Elijah. Elijah gave it all up, and then he followed God's lead. And what Elijah wanted was something that would change things for now. And what Elijah got was a blessing that changed generations. Like, that's what happens when we let God lead. Big things. So I think it's easy to say. I think saying, let him lead you, it's an easy thing to say, but life is hard. And things get loud. And you also can get to a place where you second guess his leading. And you just don't know. So there's a conversation I had in 2020. Somebody looked at me COVID, everything else, it was a mess. The church was all closed up and everything. And apparently spiritual, apparently church and, spiritual sustenance is an essential, and it was a whole thing, right? It is essential, by the way, but that's a whole nother thing. And so somebody looked at me and they were like, you used to say, this is where I think God's leading us. And you haven't said that for a long time. And I looked at them and I said, would you like for me to say that again and be wrong again? Because life gets hard. And it's not easy. And discerning God's voice is a skill. And when you get in the way, when you take back up the mantle, when you decide you're the boss again, you uncover your face and start speaking out your own mouth, screw things up. That was tough. It's not going to be easy. The other thing that can happen, like we can screw it up, but the other thing that can happen is you can feel like it's irredeemable. It's never going to get fixed. You lose hope. That's another piece of this that we haven't even talked about. Elijah's lost hope. There is no hope. And when there is no hope, there's only death. It's not crazy that he has to die. There's no hope left. And so he's completely lost hope that it's going to get better. We have those moments in our lives too, where we lose hope. We think we're trapped. It's not ever going to be better, right? And for me, in the last week or so, 9 months really, to be honest, I've been, okay, so how do I do this without like making everybody, it's an election year. We can start there. You knew that, right? What happens in an election year is everybody likes to talk about what's wrong. And everybody likes to point fingers about why it's wrong. And everybody points fingers at each other about what's wrong and why it's wrong, and the other side's always evil, right? So you hear all of this stuff, except for certain things. Sometimes they both decide not to talk about something that's wrong together. That's the scariest stuff, actually. But so I listened to a podcast last week, and it got me real jacked up. And this is safe to say, because he's not going to win. I was listening to an RFK Jr. interview. Independents don't win in America, so I was listening to it. I'm not telling you anything else I listened to. So, can you tell I'm uncomfortable? Anyway, so I listened to an RFK Jr. interview, and he talked about the way that some of his stuff got censored online, right? Which is a common refrain. Like people, like shadow banning, like all this other stuff, right? So people on social media, the thing is, if the social media company doesn't like it, or apparently if the government doesn't like it, they have a liaison with social media companies and they'll like try to shut it down, make it so that people can't see it. So think what you want to think about that. If you think I'm a crazy conspiracy theorist, whatever, the point is not the validity of anything I'm saying. The point is what it did to me. And what it did to me was send me down the rabbit hole of the censorship, freedom of speech thing. And then I got down that rabbit hole and I had this realization this week, which I'm probably dumb for just realizing it, but I realized like we are one speech law away from me not being able to preach the Bible, right? Like one speech law away. And you're like, it'll never happen. Okay, so one speech law and a couple of Supreme Court justices away. And then you're like, no, it still never happened. Actually, it's already happened in America. It was called the Alien and Sedition Acts, and it happened in like early 1800s. So like we're one law away from not being able to preach the Bible, right? And already happened in Canada. They have a hate speech law. And if you use the wrong pronoun, you're in big trouble. And it's preferred pronoun, so you got to guess. You got to be quick on your feet. So anyway, so I realized that this could be something, at least the true to the Bible version of it could be something that becomes illegal fairly easily. Believe what you want to believe about all of it. I'm not here to make a political statement. What I'm here to say is on Thursday, If y'all wanted to know all my opinions, you should have seen me on Thursday. Lost hope, angry. We sat for 2 hours and commiserated, counseled one another, whatever you want to call it. But then Friday came. And we had our church bonfire. If you didn't come, next time sign up because it was awesome. And praise God, nobody broke a leg because the water slide was super long and super steep. But Friday came and I realized something. God preserved a remnant, even still, right? The last verse of this is where Elijah gains new hope. Yet I will preserve 7,000 others in Israel who have never bowed down to Baal or kissed him. He reveals himself to us through us. If you have this, you always have hope because you always have him. And when you don't hear him, you have us. And we hear him, so we'll hear him for you and you have hope. And so Saturday was a lot better. Because he gave me this. He reminded Elijah that he had given him this as well. I know that the idea of listening to God can sound silly to someone who's never experienced it because it's like, what do you want me to do? Listen for silence? And I know that it can be frustrating because maybe you've had that experience once, you've had a genuine experience with God, but it's been so long and you're like, maybe I just had some bad General Tso's chicken. I don't know. I know that it can be hard and it can be messy and it can seem so far off and it's an abstract thought, and it would just be so much better if I just gave you 5 steps as to how to live a better life and then it would be better and like all of that. Man, his presence changes your life. And you have to be in it for the long haul. You have to be in it for the process. You have to be willing to do the hard work. There's not a 3-step plan. There's not a 5-step plan. There's not a 12-step plan. You just wake up in the morning. You take up your cross and you start walking uphill again. And you pray that he'll meet with you that day. And you pray that by serving him, you'll feel his presence. You pray that the more you do it, the more you'll look like him. You just pray for small changes on small days for a small person who just wants to look like Jesus. He'll meet with you. You just have to be willing to do the work. Let's pray. God, let us listen better. Let us look more like you. Whatever it is we need this morning, to continue in the process, to move forward, the little nudge, whatever, just give us what we need, even if it's not what we want. Give us the faith to know that following you doesn't come back void. Give us the faith to know that you speak and that it changes things. Give us the faith to know that hope isn't silly. Just let us be more like you.